Sleeping pills for Alzheimer's disease? A news item crossed my desk and I thought I'd share it.
According to an article from the website Science Alert, a recent study suggests that a common sleeping pill may reduce the buildup of Alzheimer's proteins.
So in this video, we'll take a look at the piece and the academic journal article that it's referring to.
I'm not a healthcare professional or medical researcher, so this is a layman's commentary on some rather high-level current developments on the scientific scene. This presentation is intended for general educational, entertainment, or informational purposes only and should not be construed as advice of any kind. Additionally, we're going to be skating over, or outright ignoring, several complexities. It's best to think of what I'm doing as trying to provide you with leads that you can feel free to follow up on or not as you see fit.
Let me quickly summarize a few points from Science Alert.
But before I do that, it might be useful to keep in mind that the study seems to have been developed in light of two basic theoretical assumptions. Number one, that Alzheimer's is correlated with, if not caused by, two protein structures going haywire in the brain. These are known as amyloid beta and tau. The former, the amyloid beta, clump together into harmful structures called plaques. The latter, the tau, twist up into something referred to as neurofibrillary tangles. So, Alzheimer's, plaques, and tangles. Number two, these dysfunctions, that is, the accumulation of these plaques and tangles, might have something to do with sleep disturbances. And numerous sleep disorders are associated with Alzheimer's disease.
One possibility here, among several, is that healthy sleep somehow allows the brain to flush leftover proteins.
But of course, and incredibly, the purpose of sleep is still unknown.
As an aside, I think this serves as a striking illustration of the limits of human understanding. Sleep is something we do for hours at a time. And except in pathological cases, we do it virtually every single day. And yet, we have no definitive account of what it's for. Be that as it may, given the second assumption about the apparent connection between Alzheimer's and sleep,
it's not surprising that the study in question, which was published in 2023, concerned the drug Suvorexant, which we're told is a common treatment for insomnia.
By the way, to the theoretical assumptions, we should probably add a practical one as well. Namely, it's clear that among the major goals of the study is to add to the so-called indications for the already approved drug Suvorexant. That is, to pave the road so that ultimately physicians will be able to prescribe Suvorexant as a treatment for more than its current approved use, which is for insomnia.
After all, the study's funding came from the National Institutes of Health and the Bright Focus Foundation. The principal investigator is based out of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and there are several connections with the pharmaceutical giant Merck, which makes sense because Merck exploits Suvorexant under the brand name Belsomra, a name that is ostensibly supposed to conjure images of good sleep.
Now, why is this all important? Well, I think you should have at least a provisional picture of the operative business model here.
You can turn to a Wikipedia article for a relevant summary. The gist is that the NIH pays institutions like WashU to discover marketable interventions. Many of these are then licensed to the private sector. And remember that the NIH is largely taxpayer funded.
The reason we're hearing about it now is, again in the words of Science Alert,
that using sleeping pills to get some shut-eye could reduce the buildup of toxic clumps of protein in fluid that washes the brain clean every night.
Now you could ask the following question. Why think that the sleeping pill reduced the clumps as opposed to just the sleep itself doing the work? Maybe the sleeping pill simply facilitated a good night's rest, and the rest actually did the work of clearing the protein clumps.
Well, the researchers apparently concluded that Suvorexant did not affect total sleep time, sleep efficiency, or the amount of time spent in non-REM, or REM sleep, or the time spent in REM sleep, compared to a placebo.
So they seem to be saying something like this, between the two groups being studied, the placebo group on the one hand and the Suvorexant group on the other. The only difference between the two was the administration of the Suvorexant.
Recall that for an experiment to count as scientific in the general sense, you want to control conditions such that you only test for or change one variable at a time.
In other words, study participants got approximately the same amount and quality of sleep, whatever that comes down to, in both groups. If this is so, then the fact that one group saw a reduction in the amyloid beta can only be ascribed to one thing, namely the Suvorexant. That's the argument. All this is admittedly speculative, as I'm sure the scientists themselves would volunteer.
For example, the principal investigator, one Brendan Lucy, a neuroscientist from Washington University, states that it would be premature to start taking Suvorexant every night.
Why the wariness? Well, let's sketch a few reasons. Number one, there are underlying theoretical considerations. One of these is the perennial caution against conflating or confusing correlation and causation. Just because sleep disturbances are connected to Alzheimer's doesn't mean that we can say one causes the other, either one. So notice that warning cuts both ways.
As I mentioned in my older video on ADHD and Alzheimer's, between any two phenomena, we can roughly map out 4 possible causal relationships. In this case, the first possibility is that sleep disturbances cause Alzheimer's disease.
By the way, each of these causal directions will suggest different interventions. If sleep problems can give rise to dementia, then if you can identify and hopefully remedy the sleep issues, you could in theory be proactive about addressing and even preventing cognitive impairment.
The second causal possibility reverses the first one and supposes that Alzheimer's causes the associated sleep disturbances.
This is probably the most commonly assumed causal relationship at the popular level. The thinking would be Dad slept fine all his life, then he got Alzheimer's, and now his sleep is all disturbed. Therefore, his sleep is disturbed because of the Alzheimer's disease.
As an aside, one thing to watch out for with any of these is a logical fallacy known as post hoc ergo propter hoc. This is, of course, Latin for the phrase after this, therefore because of this. A playful example of this is given by the Cornell Law School. A dog barks, then the power goes out, and someone concludes that the power went out because the dog barked.
Here's another example. On Monday, I woke up with a sore throat and a stuffy nose. All through the day, I took an over-the-counter cold pill. Tuesday, I felt fine. Therefore, the cold pill cured me.
Still another possibility for causal direction is that both Alzheimer's and various sleep disturbances are caused by some, still as yet unknown, third cause. Call that X. Finally, it might turn out, present appearances to the contrary, that Alzheimer's and sleep disturbances have 2 different, unrelated causes.
Okay, so bottom line, you've got to be careful about reasoning with respect to causation. Here's another problem. Even if interrupted sleep is to blame for the accumulation of plaques and tangles, that only kicks the ultimate question down the road, so to speak. What causes the interruption to sleep in the first place? In other words, there would be plenty of additional questions. Moreover, the participants in the study were all middle-aged. Of course, sometimes Alzheimer's does afflict younger persons, quote unquote.
When this happens, and the cutoff is frequently, if somewhat arbitrarily, set at age 65, it's known as early onset Alzheimer's. But the history of the discovery of Alzheimer's notwithstanding, this is currently considered to be a rare form of the disease. Much more common is the late onset variety, which generally begins after age 65, as opposed to the early onset variety, which is often diagnosed in individuals in their 40s or 50s.
Given this, it's not entirely clear what direct relevance a study like this has for seniors with dementia. After all, it involved cognitively unimpaired, middle-aged people.
Lots of people who may be attracted by titles of popular articles could be led to assume that this study translates straight away to their afflicted relatives. and that's just not the case.
Now, I'm not insinuating that it has no interest whatsoever. Quite possibly there's a prevention angle that's in play here. But the overall good health of the study participants does raise questions regarding applicability. It's one thing to lower the amyloid or tau levels in a person who does not have pathological plaques or tangles. It's quite another to lower the protein levels, at least in a meaningful way, for somebody who does have full-blown Alzheimer's disease. Bear in mind that the reduction of these proteins, beta amyloid and tau, is only clinically significant if it turns out that Alzheimer's is caused by their buildup, or if their reduction is correlated with the diminishment or relief of dementia symptoms. And the present study wasn't remotely close to establishing either of these things, let alone both of them. Don't misunderstand. I'm not criticizing the study on that account. I'm simply pointing out that it's probably best thought of as a baby step rather than a quantum leap in our understanding. Given the state of our knowledge, the actual causal mechanisms behind Alzheimer's are simply unknown. There's no one agreed upon cause for Alzheimer's disease. While the beta amyloid and tau hypotheses, and they are actually two discrete hypotheses, while these are possible explanations, they're not the only ones, and they compete with each other, as well as the fact that both are far from being conclusively established. On a more promising note, you could construe this study as one that examines a multi-targeted approach to Alzheimer's treatment. That is, Suvorexant has a reputation as a sleep aid, and, at least since this study, it now also has a possibility that it might reduce plaques and tangles. So you might think that Suvorexant has promise whether it turns out that Alzheimer's is caused by plaques and tangles, or if it's caused by sleep disturbances, or possibly some combination of both. But this brings me to my last set of cautionary remarks.
And I'll segue by noticing that the study only looked at a 2-night interval, actually 36 hours.
Why so brief? Part of the reason surely is that sleeping pills can easily become habit-forming. So researchers would have run headlong into a moral quandary if they gave otherwise healthy people potentially addictive drugs. Still, the obvious persistent worry is that 36 hours is too short an interval to establish anything really significant about any drug. What's a bit curious is that the experiment appears to establish simultaneously both that Suvorexant is effective at reducing amyloid beta and that Suvorexant is ineffective at increasing the amount or quality of a person's sleep. And remember, that's the main thing that Suvorexant is supposed to do. It's what it's already approved for. For we're told that the Suvorexant group had, for all intents and purposes, the same amount or the same quality of sleep as the control group. But this would imply that Suvorexant had no measurable effect on either the amount or the quality of sleep for that group. Now, a defender could say, well, look, the experiment only ranged over 36 hours. You'd have to give Suvorexant more time to work for it to function well as a sleep aid. But if 36 hours isn't enough time to establish that the Suvorexant isn't effective when it comes to being a sleep aid, why would it suddenly be a sufficient interval to establish that the Suvorexant is significant when it comes to reducing the amount of amyloid beta clumps? Now, another person might retort that it wasn't a sleep study after all. For example, the people studied didn't have insomnia, which is what Suvorexant is used for. And someone might continue, if they had insomnia, then Suvorexant would have effectively increased their amount or quality of sleep. Now, maybe this is the case, but 2 points. Firstly, of course, the people in the present study did not have Alzheimer's disease either. So if you need insomniacs to establish the efficacy of sleep aids, then why wouldn't you need Alzheimer's patients to establish the effectiveness of a protein clump reducer? Therefore, the critic's reply tends to blow up in her face. What we have here is a study of cognitively healthy people that's supposed to have possible clinical relevance for cognitively unhealthy people. Specifically, we're supposed to think that Suvorexant shows promise for amyloid beta reduction. But, mutatis mutandis, if this study shows that Suvorexant is effective at reducing amyloid beta, then it also shows that Suvorexant is ineffective at increasing the amount or quality of a person's sleep. Maybe it would turn out that Suvorexant is more effective as an amyloid beta reducer than it is as a sleep aid.
Maybe it'll go into the waste bin like the previously studied and chemically similar Alzorexant. Incidentally, I emailed the study's principal investigator, Dr. Brendan Lucy, and put my worry to him directly. I'll give him the final word by reading the substance of his reply. Quote, "My interpretation of our data is that Suvorexant has sleep-dependent and sleep-independent effects on amyloid beta and tau phosphorylation. Suvorexant affects sleep and has an FDA indication to treat insomnia. We may not have seen a sleep effect in our study because participants were in a new environment with IVs and a lumbar catheter and frequent interruptions from nursing staff to collect blood and CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. The caveat is that I can only hypothesize, as our study was not designed to test sleep-dependent versus sleep-independent effects." End quote. Suffice it to say that further research is needed, and indeed, ongoing.
Finally, let me say this. Alzheimer's and other forms of cognitive impairment and dementia are horrible diseases. There's absolutely no question about that. Obviously, my whole project is dedicated to or premised upon that very fact. So, people suffering from these afflictions are in a desperate situation. Doctors have to do the best they can with the resources they have available to them. And given all that, Suvorexant may yet have a role to play, at least until such time as some major Alzheimer's disease breakthrough occurs. We'll just have to keep a close eye on the situation.
But if you found something of interest in this video, I do ask that you click the like button. And if you'd be interested in supporting my efforts to wade through the sometimes highly technical jargon associated with this sort of news, then you can help me simply by subscribing and by sharing the original link to this video with your social network. Don't forget to activate notifications if you want to be alerted to new content as it becomes available.
In the meantime, I wish you all the best in your healthcare or in your caretaking situation. Thank you so much for watching.